All right. In the break, I received this teaching award last year, and they're finally recognizing me for it because of COVID, which is great. But they're asking me to write 200 words about myself, which is just the worst thing to have to do. So if I'm off, that's why. All right, so we're talking about these supply chain issues. So one thing I do in my other graduate class is we have these special topics days where I ask a question that no one knows the answer to, and we're not supposed to have done any work before class. And then what we do is we research it together. It works out because I only have 2 students in the class. But this is what we talked about Friday. We said, okay, what do we think has caused problems in the supply chain? And we listed all the things we thought, we kind of heard in the news, and then we found our answers. And what we found was this article, and this was a really helpful article. I'm not a super big fan of the New York Times these days. I think it's a little left-leaning. But I find they do a really good job with the economics analysis, and this is a great article. So, the first thing is, what is the supply chain? First answer, the class I hated the most as an undergraduate. I studied business at the UW Stout in Menominee, Wisconsin, and my God, I hated my supply chain classes. I remember just falling asleep in them. And it's weird because we have a professor here at Valpo who's apparently amazing, Sanjay Kumar, and people say, oh, I love supply chain management. I'm like, what is this guy teaching? But now is the supply chain's time because I have to pay attention to it. So what it is it's the usually invisible pathway of manufacturing, transportation, and logistics that gets goods from where they're manufactured, mined, or grown to where they are. Okay, so what's the deal? Well, it's all messed up. So the first thing that happened is that COVID hit the Asian countries hard first. Remember this? It was Japan. I remember teaching in my class how Japan's GDP was going to drop, and I was like, oh my God, this is awful. Well, then it hit us, right? China, we know it hit China hard. And so what happened immediately is factories shut down or had to drop production because of COVID. So shipping companies are constantly forecasting demand, right? And so what they did is they dropped their schedule. They forecasted a decrease in demand. They're like, oh, we better ease up. There's not going to be as much stuff shipped for a while. Wrong move, right? Whoops. So what happened is we ended up buying more of lots of things. And so these are the things that we talked about as the winners. Number one, workout equipment. So I actually was one of those people. I set up a gym in my basement. The one thing I could not get was 12-pound dumbbells. Oh my God, there was a shortage on those. And I theorized it's because those are weights that men and women use, right? So like I use it as a woman, but my husband would also use those. So 12-pound dumbbells. Home office equipment, obviously. Lumber, building equipment. I might have mentioned we built a fence in our backyard, and they said, listen, if you wait until next year, it'll be cheaper. Kitchen equipment. Do you remember there was like a shortage of yeast and flour, right? All of this stuff. So we saw this huge increase in demand. And by the way, this is what happened to toilet paper. There was not a shortage in all kinds of toilet paper. There was plenty being produced for places like in the office here. The problem was there was such an increase in demand for toilet paper at home. So we saw this weird demand increase even though they'd forecasted a decrease. So the other thing to keep in mind is many factories use imported inputs, and so these were in short supply. So for example, when you make a car, you have to import computer chips from other countries. So I always think when I drive to Wisconsin, there's a big Dodge dealership. They have to import goods from all over the world to make those cars. And so lots of goods are made in China, as we know. Okay, so then lots of goods are made in China, finished goods as well. And so what happened is goods piled up there and in other parts of Asia where there was a profound shortage of shipping containers. Okay, so this is stuff we can start to understand as economists now. So what happened to all the container ships? First thing, they got stuck in the wrong places. So what happened in the beginning of the pandemic is they were shipping medical supplies from China. Things like masks, hospital gowns, whatever. So they were going to different places they didn't normally go, like West Africa or South Asia, according to the article. And then they didn't come back, right? So there's not like a reason for the ship to go from West Africa to China right away, and they're not going to go empty. So they were just like stuck in the wrong places. So the supply of container ships dropped. Number two, ports in the U.S. were overwhelmed. This is what we have all probably seen in the news. Too many ships, they're just parked offshore, they're anchored. So there was just like extra ships, and also workers were in quarantine. And so again, this is going to cause the supply of container ships to drop if they're just like stuck there. I don't know if you guys remember the Suez Canal. There was a ship stuck there, and I remember thinking, wow, can this really disrupt the supply chain this much? And I did. Major ports in China were closed due to COVID. Again, supply drops. Now look at this. 1, 2, 3, 4 reasons supply dropped. So places like the Home Depot and Target were like, well, we can't get stuff. Let's just order more. Meanwhile, demand increases. So here's my beautiful graph. I do not draw graphs often, so it's important. I must think it's important. So we've got a figure from the article. So it used to cost $2,000 to ship from Shanghai to LA. So we've got like a demand for shipping this route and a supply of shipping this route. If you remember, there are 4 reasons supply would have shifted left. At least one reason demand shifted to the right. So in our class on Friday, we drew this as like ultimately the quantity of shipping has dropped, right? Because we don't have as much shipped. But we see the price increased, and this is from the article, to $25,000. So the price used to be $2,000, now it's $25,000. So that's a tremendous increase in price. And if you're not like convinced by this graph, you can imagine if I would have drawn it more elastic, so a more elastic supply and demand, which I think is reasonable in this market, that could explain it as well. Continuing on, shortages beget shortages. So if there's already a shortage for like the article says, if you need 27 inputs and you're missing 1, then the whole thing's ruined, right? So producers couldn't get inputs, so it got worse and worse and worse. Okay, so the article talks about how, is it just the pandemic's fault? Like, is that really the only thing that's going on here? Yes and no. So one thing that I remember learning in business school is this thing called just-in-time manufacturing. And that is when producers keep lean inventories. So like it's very costly to keep a bunch of stuff. Like you produce it and then like set it in a warehouse. It's a costly thing to do. And so the trend has been toward just-in-time manufacturing. You only manufacture once you get the order. The problem is then you've got no inventory, right? So if something happens to the global supply chain, it can really disrupt things. The other thing relates exactly to what we've been talking about, which is a consolidation of market power. The article gives an example of meat packers. There's just not that many meat packers anymore. They keep buying each other up, right? And so what's going to happen is the prices are going to be high and there's less produced, as we know. There's also an Economist article you're welcome to check out if you'd like, that brings a British perspective and a European perspective because it's a British news magazine. They talk a lot about the switch to natural gas from coal as being a problem. And we're going to see this. I'm going to show you inflation numbers. This is true here as well. So as we shift from natural gas, we're seeing the price of that rise. The other thing is there's a carbon market in Europe that's apparently been kind of going nuts. And so the price of carbon emissions has been going up, which is causing some prices to go up. And then The Economist is known as being very pro-free trade. So this is not a huge surprise. They blame it on people trying to be protectionist. So for example, countries used to just try to open up barriers to trade. And now they're kind of like, wait a second, let's not do that so quickly. There are tariffs. Apparently President Biden just agreed to keep these tariffs on Chinese goods. And so that's another reason is there's just protections to go kind of get in the way. So what is the result? All right, so I made you one graph. I wasn't about to make you two with my clunky PowerPoint skills. So I found one. You guys are going to be learning, if you take macro next semester, the aggregate demand, aggregate supply model. You do not need to know this. This is just if you teach it. Like I want to show you what's happening. This is a supply shock. Okay, so most recessions are caused by a demand shock. This is a supply shock. So what happens is prices go up and GDP goes down. That's referred to as stagflation. It's not ideal. I do not like stagflation. If I was Jerome Powell, it would be something I'd be very, very, very stressed out about. When I teach this model, I say the only thing that's ever caused a supply shock in this country has been oil. Not true anymore, right? So we've got these supply chain issues. It's fascinating from a macro standpoint as well. The next thing I wanted to show you, and this is something you'll study next semester, is inflation, right? People are talking about inflation. So if we pull up the Consumer Price Index, and you can learn all about this, or you might know it, it's a basket of 60,000 goods purchased by a typical urban family of 4 in a year. So you follow the prices of these things. But one thing that we can do is if we look at the news release, if you look at the very right, this is the annual data. Doesn't make a lot of sense, it's monthly. So the Consumer Price Index, this is the last month. By the time this comes out, there will be new data, so it might actually be interesting for you to pull up the new numbers. Inflation has increased 5.4%, 24% in energy. If you look at the price of fuel oil, utility gas, like natural gas, let's see, that's gone up. So we're seeing tremendous increases in this. Sometimes what we do is we take out food and oil prices because we think those are too volatile and we want to just see like underlying inflation. So that's called the core CPI. That's this 4%. So that's how much that has increased. Look at used cars, right? I mentioned that earlier. There were some months where used car prices increased at an annual rate of 10%. Okay? So this is one of those things that the Federal Reserve is looking closely at. So they're easing back on their bond buying program, which again you will learn, but they're not like attacking inflation that hard, and that's because they're seeing these good signs. So this is a good sign that used cars are like starting to normalize a little bit, but you can see prices of housing increased, prices of medical care increased a little bit. Prices of food have increased. So we're seeing inflation, right? So we think about, well, what's this causing? Well, number one, I go to Meijer and there's not as much toilet paper. It's hard to buy a car. You can't choose the color car you want anymore. My friends just bought a chair. They've like saved up all their money for these chairs and they keep getting delayed and delayed and delayed. But on a macro scale, we see inflation, and that's something people are worried about. So when is this going to let up? Q2 of 2022 is what I keep hearing. People say at least through that. So microeconomics is all over the news right now, and I think it's worth our time covering that. So again, what am I asking you to do this week? I am asking you guys to think of something you're interested in, ideally not a waste of your time, something you're going to teach in class anyway. I think Rachel's presenting on Netflix. That might be cool too. Write a little analysis, 2 to 3 page paper. It'll be mostly pass-fail. Please do not get stressed out about this. And hopefully we can learn some stuff about something we're interested in. We've got Thanksgiving coming up. I'm going to be out of town. Give me a couple days to respond to emails. And then we're in the final stretch of the semester.